It started as most fundamental human defenses do, not as a strategy, but as an instinct, a reflex, a biological imperative coded somewhere deep in the primal parts of my brain, in the ancient sections that predate language, that predate civilization, that remember when being understood by the tribe meant survival, and being misunderstood meant exile. The smile, I would come to learn, was my first diplomatic mission to a foreign country, the country of other people. I was 10 years old in Mrs. Davison's art class on a Tuesday afternoon in April, when the light came through the high windows at an angle that made everything look like it was underwater. The air was thick with the smell of wet clay and tempera paint, a scent I still associate with a specific kind of vulnerability, the vulnerability of creation, of bringing something internal into the harsh light of external judgment. There was also the faint smell of the cafeteria's Taco Tuesday wafting down the hallway, mixing with the earth and the paint to create an olfactory cocktail that was both comforting and vaguely nauseating. The assignment was simple: make a pot, a simple, functional, coiled clay pot. Mrs. Davison had demonstrated the technique with her capable, paint-stained hands, rolling out long clay snakes and stacking them in neat, ascending circles. "Think about what your pot will hold," she had said, her voice bright with educational enthusiasm. "Will it hold pencils, candy? Think about function." All around me, my classmates were producing perfectly serviceable, lopsided cylinders. There was Jenny Martinez, her tongue poking out in concentration, carefully smoothing the coils of what would obviously become a pencil holder. There was Marcus Webb, always the minimalist, building a squat, wide bowl with an almost zen-like economy of effort. There was the ambient noise of 2510, year olds working, the soft slap of clay, the scrape of tools, the occasional giggle, the background hum of existence. But my hands, they had other ideas. The clay, this cool, malleable earth that still held the memory of rivers and ancient seabeds, seemed to speak to me, not in words, but in a language of pressure and potential. It was a conversation conducted entirely through touch. The clay would push back against my fingers, suggesting a curve. I would respond, pressing more gently here, more firmly there. I didn't set out to be difficult. I set out to be faithful to the silent directive in the material. I was not making something. I was midwifing something that wanted to be born. Time did that strange thing it does when you're completely absorbed. The classroom sounds faded to a distant murmur. The Tuesday afternoon light shifted across my table. My breathing slowed and deepened. I was not 10. Year. Old me sitting in a plastic chair in a public elementary school. I was ageless. I was a conduit. I was the meeting point between intention and material. My fingertips, usually clumsy and uncertain in the world of kickball and cursive writing, became precise and knowing. What emerged from my fingertips was not a pot. It was a swirling, intricate form, something between a heart and a tree root system, with tiny, delicate tendrils reaching out and folding back into themselves. It had chambers and hollows that served no practical function, but felt emotionally necessary. It was asymmetrical, but the asymmetry felt intentional, like the way a river bends. It was fragile and strange, and to my 10-year-old sensibilities utterly beautiful. It was a physical manifestation of a feeling. I had no name for a feeling of deep, tangled connection to things unseen, a melancholy wonder at the complexity of everything. It was what it felt like inside my chest when I lay in the backyard and looked up at the clouds and thought about infinity. It was what it felt like when I heard my mother singing to herself in the kitchen and suddenly became aware that she had an entire internal life I knew nothing about. It was the shape of longing, though I didn't know that word yet. Mrs. Davison came around, making her rounds with a clipboard and her cheerful voice offering praise like small, shiny candies. "Oh, Marcus, wonderful, very Japanese. Jenny, I love the texture you've added." Her voice got closer. I heard her shoes, sensible flats that squeaked slightly on the linoleum, stop beside my table. There was a pause. In that pause, I felt something shift. I looked up at her, and I saw her face doing complicated things. Her smile was still there, but it was struggling against something else, confusion, perhaps, or concern. Oh, what a lovely! What is it, dear? My heart, which had been soaring, high and free like a bird over an ocean, stuttered and plummeted. In her question, I heard the terrible truth. What was obvious to me was incomprehensible to her. The bridge I thought I had built between my internal world and the external one had not, in fact, reached the other shore. I was standing on my side, waving, and she was standing on hers, squinting, unable to see me clearly. It's the inside of an important thought," I said, my voice small and already apologetic. Even as the words left my mouth, I knew they were inadequate. How do you explain the texture of your soul? How do you describe the architecture of a feeling? Her smile remained fixed, a professional smile, a teacher's smile, but a veil of polite confusion descended over her eyes. They were kind eyes, blue and framed by crow's feet earned from years of smiling at children. But in that moment, they were also uncomprehending. She looked at my creation the way someone might look at a word written in a language they don't speak, seeing the symbols, but unable to access the meaning. She didn't see the inside of an important thought. She saw a lump of clay that had failed to become a pot. She saw a student who hadn't followed instructions. She saw a problem to be gently corrected. Well, it's very creative, she said, the word landing not as a compliment, but as a diagnosis. Creative, the thing you call something when you can't call it good. Creative, the participation trophy of the art world. Maybe next time, try to follow the instructions a little more closely. Remember, we're learning about functional pottery. Think about what it can hold. But it does hold something, I wanted to say. It holds everything I can't say out loud. It holds the feeling of being alive and not understanding why. It holds the bigness that doesn't fit in my body. I didn't say any of that. The heat of a profound shame rushed to my cheeks, a physical sensation so intense it felt like fever. My eyes prickled with the warning signs of tears, which I absolutely could not allow. Crying in art class was social suicide. I had presented my inner world, and it had been met with a kind, well-meaning, but absolute incomprehension. I looked down at my strange, beautiful creation, and for the first time, I saw it as she saw it, wrong. Impractical, weird. The word weird was perhaps the worst insult in the vocabulary of 10-year-olds. We were all engaged in the desperate project of being normal, of fitting in, of not standing out in ways that would make us vulnerable. And I had just sculpted my vulnerability and put it on display. In that moment, a choice presented itself with crystalline clarity. I could try to explain the feeling, the compulsion, the silent music that had guided my hands. I could try to articulate the inarticulable to a woman whose world was built on pots that held pencils. I could defend my strange little sculpture and, by extension, my strange little interior life, or I could smile. So I smiled, a tight little smile that pulled at the corners of my mouth but didn't reach my eyes, a smile that engaged only the minimum required facial muscles, a smile that said, I understand and I will do better, a smile that said, I will be normal now, a smile that said, please don't look at me anymore, a smile that sealed the fissure that had just opened between my internal experience and the external world. That smile was a curtain drawn across a stage that was too strange for its audience. It was my first conscious act of translation. I was not translating one language to another. I was translating the inexplicable into the acceptable, the profound into the palatable. The smile was the only bridge I could build between the landscape of my soul and the continent of everyone else. It was a rickety, insufficient bridge, but it was all I had. Okay, I said quietly, I'll try harder next time. Mrs. Davison's face relaxed with visible relief. I had given her the response she needed. I had acknowledged the error. The social contract was restored. She patted my shoulder and moved on to the next table, her squeaky shoes carrying her toward the more comprehensible creations of my peers. I sat there for the remaining 20 minutes of class, my hands resting on either side of my sculpture, no longer touching it. It sat between us, me and the rest of the world, a tiny monument to the impossibility of being fully known. When the bell rang and we were instructed to place our work on the drying shelf, I carried mine carefully, my fingers remembering its grooves and hollows. I placed it on the shelf next to Jenny's neat pencil holder, and the contrast was almost comical. Hers was sensible, competent, destined for a practical life on a desk. Mine was chaotic, emotional, destined for what I didn't know. This became the pattern, the template, the founding myth of my emotional life. The smile became my most reliable tool, and like any tool used over and over, I became skillful with it. I developed variations. There was the I'm listening smile for conversations I was only half present for. There was the that's so funny smile for jokes I didn't actually find funny, but knew I was supposed to. There was the everything is fine smile for moments when everything was decidedly not fine. Each smile was a small act of performance, a gesture toward normalcy, a reassurance to others that they didn't need to worry about me, that I wasn't going to be difficult, that I could be relied upon to maintain the social atmosphere. In the cacophony of the middle school cafeteria, a place that seemed designed by someone who had studied the acoustics of torture, where the social currency was gossip about pop stars and crushes, and who had gotten their period and who was going out, with whom I would feel a sudden, overwhelming wave of it wasn't sadness, not exactly. It was more like a awareness of the fleeting nature of it all. I'd look at my friends laughing, their faces illuminated by the harsh fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly jaundiced, their mouths open laugh, and I would see the ghosts of their future selves, the echoes of their past sorrows. I would see them at 30, 40, 70. I would see the distance between who they were now, young and convinced of their own immortality, and who they would become adults shaped by disappointments I couldn't yet name. I'd feel the sheer, staggering statistical improbability of any of us being here, in this specific time and place, in this beige cafeteria with its smell of industrial pizza and bleach, sitting at this particular table, born into these particular bodies, living these particular lives. The cafeteria would become a spaceship hurtling through the void, and we were all just passengers who had forgotten we were traveling, who had gotten so distracted by the in-flight entertainment that we'd forgotten about the infinite darkness outside the windows. It would hollow me out, this awareness. I would feel my personhood drain away, leaving only a consciousness observing the scene. The noise, the shrieks of laughter, the clatter of trays, the bass notes of boys trying to outdo each other, wasn't just noise. It was evidence of our collective attempt to ward off the silence, the big silence, the ultimate silence that waited for all of us. Every laugh was a small defiance. Every conversation about nothing was a barricade against the void. What do you say in the middle of a conversation about the latest teen movie? What do you say when Sarah is going on about how hot the lead actor is, and Brittany is saying she heard he has a girlfriend in real life, and they're both looking at you expectantly, waiting for your contribution? Do you say, I'm suddenly gripped by a philosophical terror, born of cosmic insignificance and the relentless passage of time? Do you say, I just realized we're all going to die and nothing we're talking about matters, and also it's the only thing that matters because this moment right here, you laughing at me with pizza sauce on your chin, this is it, this is the whole thing, this is what we get? No, you don't, you can't, you smile. You nod, you say, yeah, he's totally hot. Or yeah, I heard that too. You say words that match the expected frequency of the conversation. The smile becomes a placeholder for the volume of feeling you cannot possibly release. It becomes a compression algorithm, reducing the unmanageable vastness of your internal experience into a socially acceptable file size. I remember one lunch period in particular, 7th grade, late autumn. I was sitting with my usual group, Sarah, Brittany, and Melissa. We were at our designated table, the one by the window that looked out onto the parking lot, which gave us something to look at when conversations lagged. Melissa was in the middle of a story about her older brother's friend's party, which she hadn't been to but had heard about, and the story was mostly about who had kissed whom in a basement. The details seemed simultaneously incredibly important and utterly meaningless. Mid-story, I looked down at my hands resting on the table. They were my hands, the same hands that had shaped that clay sculpture years ago, the same hands I'd been living with my entire life, but for a moment they looked alien to me. I thought about how hands are just arrangements of bone and muscle and skin, how they're governed by electrical signals from a brain that we don't really understand, how the me that was observing the hands was somehow located in the same body as the hands but felt entirely separate from them. I flexed my fingers and watched them move, and the gap between the intention to move and the movement itself suddenly seemed infinite, a canyon I couldn't cross. "Are you okay?" Sarah was looking at me with concern. "You look weird." The table went quiet, all eyes on me. I had been absent too long. The me that was supposed to be contributing to the conversation about the party had vanished, and they'd noticed. I had broken the unspoken rule: you can tune out, but you can't look like you're tuning out. I smiled. The smile was instant, instinctive, a reflex faster than thought. "Yes, sorry, just spaced out. What happened at the party?" The concern in Sarah's face melted into relief. The conversation resumed. The moment passed. The smile had done its job. It had concealed the temporary malfunction, the glitch in my ability to maintain the performance of normal adolescent girlhood. It had hidden the existential dissociation, the momentary experience of being a consciousness trapped in meat, the sudden awareness of the arbitrary nature of everything. By high school, the architecture of the smile had become more sophisticated, more nuanced. It was no longer just a curtain. It was a full-scale theatrical production, with costumes and lighting and carefully scripted dialogue. I had studied the social dynamics the way a scientist studies a petri dish. I had identified the patterns, the rhythms, the unspoken rules. I knew when to laugh, when to look sympathetic, when to offer advice, when to just listen. I knew how to modulate my voice, how to use body language to signal engagement, how to ask questions that would keep the other person talking so I didn't have to. I was the playwright, director, and lead actor in the play of being fine. And the show ran every day, matinee and evening performances. The reviews were good. People liked me. I was considered nice, smart, a good listener, deep but not weird about it. I had threaded the needle, interesting enough to not be boring, but not so interesting that I made people uncomfortable. I had found the acceptable bandwidth of depth. I went to parties because that's what you did in high school. You went to parties to prove you were normal, that you were social, that you were young and alive, and not wasting your youth thinking too hard. I stood in buzzing basements, the bass of the music thumping through the floorboards and into the soles of my feet. A counterfeit heartbeat, someone else's rhythm that my body was forced to accommodate. The air was always the same, a fog of cheap body spray, spilled beer, and the particular musk of teenage bodies in close proximity. I held a red plastic cup, the contents of which I rarely drank, because the feeling of being outside of myself was intoxicating enough. I didn't need alcohol to feel disoriented. I was already living in a state of permanent, low-grade derealization. I remember one party in particular, the one that became, in my memory, emblematic of all the others. It was at the house of Jake Palmer, a football player, a boy who moved through the world with the easy confidence of someone who had never had to question whether he belonged. The house was all sprawling McMansion, a monument to a certain kind of American success, vaulted ceilings, a chandelier in the foyer, a kitchen with granite countertops and stainless steel appliances, tasteful, expensive furniture that we were all quietly terrorizing with our presence. Jake's parents were out of town, a detail that had been announced with the kind of reverence usually reserved for religious events. Someone had created a playlist that was trying very hard to curate a vibe. Hip hop segueing into indie rock segueing into pop. A democratic approach to music that meant everyone was equally dissatisfied. I was perched on the arm of a leather sofa in the living room, surrounded by a constellation of beautiful, laughing people. There was Jake, of course, all broad shoulders and easy grin. There was Emma, his girlfriend, who had the kind of effortless beauty that made other girls hate her and want to be her in equal measure. There was Chris, the funny one, always performing, always trying to get the laugh. There was Ashley, the smart one, who was going to an Ivy League school and made sure everyone knew it. And there were others, faces I recognized from the hallways, people who occupied specific niches in the high school ecosystem. A boy I had a crush on was telling a story. His name was David, and he had dark hair that fell into his eyes and a way of tilting his head when he listened that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. He was telling a story about something that had happened at practice, something involving a misunderstood play and a prank on the coach. His hands were flying through the air, illustrating, punctuating, conducting the story like a symphony. Everyone was enraptured. The laughter came in waves, building and cresting. I laughed too, on cue, at the right moments, and I felt it again. That split in reality, that sense of being simultaneously present and absent. On one level, I was there. I was sitting on the arm of the sofa, my weight distributed precisely, my red cup in my hand, a smile on my face. I was tracking the story, processing the words, understanding why they were funny. I was making the appropriate eye contact, leaning in at the right moments, performing attentiveness and enjoyment. But on another, deeper level, I was an anthropologist from another planet, observing a bizarre and fascinating ritual. I was taking field notes in my mind. I was studying the cadence of their laughter, how it wasn't really about the story being that funny, but about the collective experience of laughing together, about the bonding that happened through shared mirth. I was noting the way they used touch to punctuate sentences. A hand on a shoulder, a playful shove, the casual physical intimacy that seemed to come so naturally to them and felt so alien to me. I was mapping the unspoken hierarchies that governed the group. Who could interrupt whom, whose jokes landed and whose didn't, who had to work for attention and who received it automatically. The noise wasn't just noise. It was the sound of a collective attempt to ward off the same silence I was so intimate with. Their joy seemed to me like a beautiful, desperate defiance. They were young and alive and together, and they were squeezing every drop of experience out of this Saturday night, this house party, this brief window before adulthood and responsibility and the long, slow march toward death. And my own feeling wasn't one of superiority. I didn't think I was better than them for seeing this. If anything, I envied them. I envied their ability to be fully present, to lose themselves in the moment, to not be conducting a meta-analysis while simultaneously participating. I felt a profound, aching loneliness. I was in the ocean, but I was not made of water. I was a different element altogether, something that didn't mix, that remained separate no matter how hard I tried to dissolve. I looked at David, at the way the light from the floor lamp caught the angle of his jaw, and I felt a wave of something that was part desire and part grief. I wanted him, yes, but more than that, I wanted to be the kind of person who could want someone in a simple, uncomplicated way. I wanted to be a girl at a party with a crush on a boy. Full stop. Not a girl at a party with a crush on a boy, while simultaneously having an existential crisis about the nature of human connection, and the impossibility of ever truly knowing another person, and the fact that all relationships are, at their core, two consciousnesses yelling across an unbridgeable void, hoping their words land in something resembling their intended meaning. Someone shouted my name, pulling me violently back into my body, into the room, into the moment. It was Chris, the funny one. "Hey, Earth to you. You're so quiet. Are you okay?" The spotlight was on me. The anthropologist had been seen. The observer had been observed. The room's attention, which had been diffused across the group, was now focused on me like a magnifying glass concentrating the sun's rays. I could feel my cheeks flush. I had been absent too long. I had let the mask slip. I had failed to maintain the performance. I could have told the truth. I could have said I was contemplating the existential function of social ritual in the face of inevitable death. I was thinking about how we're all just consciousnesses trapped in bodies, performing elaborate dances to avoid confronting the fundamental isolation of being alive. I was wondering if any of you ever feel like you're watching your life from the outside, like you're not really here, like there's a glass wall between you and the rest of the world that no one else can see. I was thinking that this moment right here, all of us in this room, is both completely meaningless and the only thing that has ever mattered. Instead, I deployed the smile, the "I'm fine" and "having a great time" smile. It was a masterpiece of brevity and misdirection, a magic trick performed with facial muscles. It said everything was normal. It said I was just like them. It said there was nothing to worry about. Yeah, just tired. I said, my voice hitting the exact right note of casual apology. "Big week, you know, lots of tests." The group nodded, a wave of understanding passing through them like a current. They knew about big weeks. They knew about tests. This was a language they spoke fluently. They didn't know about existential disassociation. They didn't know about the glass wall. The smile had once again done its job. It had hidden what I couldn't explain. It had translated the untranslatable into something manageable, something forgettable. The spotlight moved away from me. The conversation resumed. I was released back into my comfortable invisibility. I stayed at the party for another hour, maintaining the performance, hitting my marks. When I left, people said, "Bye, so glad you came." And I said, "Thanks for having me. It was so fun." And everyone believed it because everyone wanted to believe it. It was easier that way. This skill, this constant act of emotional translation, this perpetual performance of normalcy is not unique to me. I believe it is a silent epidemic, particularly in our Western culture, though I suspect it exists in different forms across all cultures where there is a gap between the acceptable emotional vocabulary and the actual range of human feeling. We are a society built on the pillars of individualism, productivity, and relentless optimism. We are the inheritors of the Protestant work ethic, the American dream, the cult of positive thinking. We are told from birth that we can be anything we want to be, that success is just a matter of hard work and determination, that happiness is a choice. We are told to follow our bliss, to think positive, to lean in. Our value is often measured by our visible output, our sociability, our unwavering grit. We collect self-help books like talismans. We optimize our morning routines. We track our productivity. We curate our social media to show the highlight reel. The good hair days, the beautiful meals, the vacations, the achievements. We have created a culture of mandatory cheerfulness, where to admit struggle is to admit failure. There is no room in this narrative for the quiet ache of the soul, for the days when the world seems draped in a gray veil, for the mornings when you wake up and can't remember why you're supposed to want any of this. There is no room for the moments when you look at your own life from the outside and feel nothing but a bewildering sense of estrangement, like you've woken up in someone else's story and can't figure out how you got there or what your lines are supposed to be. How do you explain to your boss in a Monday morning stand-up meeting that the project is delayed not because of any technical obstacle, but because you've been paralyzed by a sudden, piercing awareness of the infinite? How do you say, "I spent 3 hours staring at my computer screen. Not because I couldn't figure out the code, but because I couldn't figure out why the code mattered, why any of it mattered, why we're all pretending that shipping features on time has any cosmic significance whatsoever. How do you put that on a performance improvement plan? You can't. So, you learn the language of the practical. You talk about bandwidth and prioritization and dependencies. You create a spreadsheet to prove your worth because you cannot show them the landscape of your heart. You break down your emotional paralysis into actionable items, struggled with motivation, becomes experienced some blockers, couldn't see the point, becomes reevaluating approach. You smile in the boardroom, your voice steady and confident, walking them through your slides, hitting the key messages, addressing concerns, projecting competence. And while you're doing this behind your back, your hand is clenched so tight your nails leave half. Moon impressions in your palm, little crescent wounds that you'll notice later and won't remember making. That clenched fist is the truth. The smile is the survival mechanism. The smile is what keeps you employed, keeps you in the social contract, keeps you from being labeled as difficult or not a team player or maybe not the right fit for our culture. I worked for several years in corporate America in an open plan office with exposed brick and a pong table that no one used because using it would signal that you weren't busy enough. The company had a flat structure, which meant everyone was encouraged to speak up, but there was still a very clear hierarchy of whose ideas got implemented. We had mandatory fun, happy hours, team-building exercises, a Slack channel for sharing memes. The company valued authenticity, which seemed to mean being casually dressed and using first names, but not actually bringing your authentic self to work. Your authentic self was too messy, too needy, too much. I had a colleague, I'll call her Samantha, who seemed to embody everything the culture valued. She was energetic, positive, always volunteering for new projects. She had a way of turning every setback into a learning opportunity. When a project failed, she'd say things like, "Well, that's valuable data," with genuine enthusiasm. I admired her and also felt exhausted just watching her. One day, I was in the bathroom, washing my hands, and I heard crying from one of the stalls. When the person emerged, it was Samantha. Her face was blotchy, her eyes red. She saw me and froze. "Are you okay?" I asked the question automatic, expected. For a moment, I thought she was going to deploy her own smile to say "I'm fine," to maintain her brand of relentless positivity. But something in her face crumpled. "No," she said, "I'm really not. I haven't been okay for months, but I can't. I don't know how to not be okay here. Do you know what I mean?" I knew exactly what she meant. We stood there in the fluorescent lit bathroom, surrounded by automatic air fresheners and motivational posters. "You've got this. Make today amazing." And for the first time, we saw each other. Not the curated work versions, but the actual humans underneath, both of us exhausted from the performance. "I know exactly what you mean," I said. We talked for 20 minutes in that bathroom, saying things we'd never said in any team meeting or one-on-one or company survey. We talked about the loneliness of pretending, about the specific exhaustion of emotional labor, about the feeling that if we stopped smiling, the whole facade would crumble and we'd be revealed as frauds. When we finally left the bathroom, we had an unspoken agreement. We would never mention this conversation in the office. Out there, we would resume our roles, but we would know, and somehow that made it bearable. For years, I thought this was my secret failure, my personal flaw, the evidence of some fundamental defect in my manufacturing, a flaw in my wiring. I had been given the script for a normal, successful life, but I kept forgetting my lines. I kept wandering off script into weird territory, into existential cul-de-sacs. Other people seemed to know instinctively how to be people. They seemed to have received a manual that I had somehow missed. They knew how to want the right things, to feel the right feelings at the right times, to be appropriately ambitious, appropriately content, appropriately everything. I was haunted by a line from the poet Sylvia Plath, from asterisk the bell jar asterisk. I felt very still and very empty, the way the eye of a tornado must feel, moving dully along in the middle of the surrounding hullabaloo. That was it exactly. That was the perfect articulation of something I had felt, but could never name. I was the still, empty eye, and the world was the hullabaloo. And my smile was the force field that kept the two separate, that maintained the illusion that I was part of the hullabaloo when really I was just moving through it, observing it, not quite touching it. I read that line in college, sitting in the library at 2 in the morning during finals week, when the building was full of exhausted students mainlining coffee and collectively vibrating with stress. I was supposed to be studying for an economics exam, but instead I was reading Plath, and when I came across that line, I actually gasped. It was the gasp of recognition, the gasp of being seen across time and death by someone who had also felt this way, who had also been the eye of the tornado. I started reading more, Plath, yes, but also Camus and Sartre, Kierkegaard and Kafka, poets like Mary Oliver and Rainer Maria Rilke. I discovered that there was an entire literary tradition of people who felt too much and saw too deeply. I wasn't alone. I wasn't broken. I was in a long, noble lineage of sensitive souls who had struggled to fit their vastness into the narrow container of ordinary life. The tragedy isn't the feeling itself. The melancholy, the introspection, the capacity to be wounded by the beauty and the terror of existence. These are not flaws. They are dimensions of depth. They are evidence of a soul that is awake, that is paying attention, that refuses to sleepwalk through life. The tragedy is the hiding. It is the energy expended in building and maintaining the facade. It is the loneliness of believing you are the only one who feels this way, the only one who has to translate, the only one whose soul doesn't fit the prefabricated container. Think about how much energy goes into hiding. Think about the cognitive load of maintaining two versions of yourself, the public one and the private one, and constantly monitoring to make sure they don't bleed into each other. Think about the vigilance required, the constant self-surveillance. It's exhausting. It's like running two operating systems simultaneously on the same computer. Eventually, something crashes. For me, the crash came in my late 20s. I had been following the script. Good grades, good college, good job, good apartment, good relationship. From the outside, everything looked fine, better than fine. I was successful by most metrics. But inside, I was disappearing. The gap between my public self and my private self had grown so wide that I couldn't find the bridge anymore. I would sit in meetings and hear myself talking, competent, articulate, engaged, and feel like I was listening to a recording, a simulation of a person. I would go to dinner parties and watch myself perform, laughing, asking questions, telling amusing anecdotes, and feel like I was puppeting a body from a distance. The breaking point was mundane, as breaking points often are. I was at brunch with friends at one of those trendy places with reclaimed wood and mason jar glasses and a menu that described everything in exhausting detail. My friends were talking about their lives, career moves, relationship updates, the usual currency of young adult friendships. Someone asked me how I was doing, and I opened my mouth to deliver the expected response, and nothing came out. The smile wouldn't come. The words wouldn't come. I just sat there, silent, feeling like I was sinking through my chair and through the floor and through the earth itself. "Are you okay?" One of my friends, Rachel, looked concerned. I wasn't okay. I hadn't been okay in so long that I had forgotten what okay felt like. But more than that, I was tired. I was so profoundly tired of pretending, of translating, of maintaining the performance. In that moment, something in me simply gave up. "No," I said, "I'm not okay. I haven't been okay. I don't know how to do this anymore." The table went quiet. I had violated the social contract. I had brought real, messy feeling into a brunch. But then Rachel reached across the table and put her hand over mine, and she said, "Thank God." Me neither. And then another friend, James, said, I thought I was the only one. And then we all started talking, really talking, not the usual surface chatter, but actual truth. We talked about depression and anxiety and existential dread and the suffocating pressure to have it all figured out. We talked about how social media had made everything worse, how we were all curating these perfect lives while privately falling apart. We talked for 3 hours, long after our food got cold, and when we finally left, I felt lighter than I had in years. The turning point for me came not in a grand epiphany, but in a slow accumulation of small cracks in the armor, small moments of choosing truth over comfort, of allowing myself to be seen even when it was scary. It was in discovering the works of writers and philosophers who spoke of this same feeling, who gave it names and context and history. I learned about saudade, the Portuguese word for a deep emotional state of nostalgic, longing for something that might never return or perhaps never existed at all. I learned about anami, the term coined by sociologist Emile Durkheim to describe the personal feeling of a lack of social norms, a disconnect between one's circumstances and one's sense of morality and purpose. I learned about the romantic concept of the sublime that terrifying beauty that overwhelms us, that makes us feel simultaneously insignificant and connected to something vast. I realized I wasn't broken. I was in a long, noble lineage of people who felt too much and saw too deeply. My problem wasn't a personal failing. It was a philosophical condition. It was a response to the fundamental human predicament. The fact that we are conscious beings aware of our own mortality, capable of conceiving of infinity but trapped in finite bodies, born into a world we didn't choose and asked to make meaning out of chaos. I began to understand that my smile, while a useful social tool, had become a prison. It was preventing real connection. By hiding what I couldn't explain, I was ensuring that it would never be explained and, more importantly, that it would never be shared. I was complicit in my own isolation. I was building walls and then wondering why I felt lonely. So I started to take small, terrifying risks. I started to lower the curtain, just an inch at a time, to let people see behind it. When a friend asked, "How are you?" I stopped defaulting to "fine." Sometimes I would say, "It's a strange day. I feel a little distant from everything." Or, "I'm struggling a bit, to be honest. Everything feels heavy." The first few times, the response was awkward. There would be a pause, a visible recalibration, but more often than not, after a moment of surprise, I would see a flicker of recognition in their eyes, a quiet "me too," a sigh of relief, a dropping of their own mask. I started to use different words, not the clinical language of psychology with its diagnoses and symptom checklists, but the poetic language of the heart. I feel like a ghost in my own house today. The weight of the sky feels a little heavy. I'm in one of those moods where everything beautiful makes me cry. These were not complaints, they were invitations. They were me saying, "This is what it's like inside me right now. If you've ever felt this way, you're not alone. If you haven't, maybe this will give you a window into a different kind of experience." And people began to accept these invitations. Slowly, tentatively, a new kind of connection began to form. I found my people, not the loudest ones in the room, not the ones who were always at the center of the party, but the quiet observers, the ones who also knew how to smile to hide what they couldn't explain. We found each other in the silent spaces between words, in the shared understanding that sometimes the most real thing you can do is acknowledge the ache without trying to fix it. There was something profound about these connections. They were different from my other friendships, which were warm and genuine, but ultimately stayed on the surface. These new connections went deeper, into the uncomfortable places, into the shadows. We could sit together in silence and it didn't feel awkward. It felt like a shared reverence for complexity. We could say, "I don't know how to explain this feeling," And the other person would nod because they knew that feeling too. That specific frustration of having an internal experience that exceeds your vocabulary. I found these people in unexpected places. There was a woman I met at a meditation class who, after the session, when everyone else was talking about how peaceful and centered they felt, whispered to me, "Does meditation ever make you feel worse? Like it just gives you more space to notice how anxious you are." We ended up getting coffee, and that conversation was the beginning of a friendship built on a foundation of admitted struggle rather than curated success. There was a colleague who sent me an email late one night, apologizing for rambling. But he'd been thinking about mortality and meaning and wanted to know if I ever thought about these things too. We started a tradition of existential lunch, where once a month we'd go to a quiet restaurant and talk about the big questions, the ones that don't have answers, the ones that most people find too depressing or too pretentious to engage with. There was my cousin, who I'd always thought of as having it all together, who confessed during a family gathering that she had been in therapy for years dealing with depression and anxiety, and that most days she felt like she was just barely holding on. That conversation changed our relationship. We stopped performing for each other and started being honest with each other. The sculpture from Mrs. Davison's class, I took it home that day, wrapped carefully in newspaper, cradling it on the bus like it was made of glass. My mom, to her credit, understood without me having to explain. She looked at it, really looked at it, turning it slowly in her hands. "This is beautiful," she said. "This is you." And she put it on a shelf in the living room, not hidden away in my room, but displayed, as if to say, "This strangeness is welcome here." It gathered dust for years, a tiny, strange monument to a feeling I didn't yet understand. I would pass it every day, sometimes stopping to look at it, remembering the feeling of making it, the brief moment of pure creative flow before shame crashed in. It became a kind of talisman for me, a reminder that once I had been brave enough to make my internal world external, even if just for a moment. I don't have it anymore. It was lost in a move somewhere, probably packed in a box that got mislabeled, ending up in a landfill or a thrift store, where maybe someone found it and wondered what it was supposed to be. But I don't need it anymore. I have become the sculpture. I am that same tangled, asymmetrical, reaching form. The tendrils that once felt like flaws, that made me feel like a failed pot, I now recognize as my capacity to feel, to connect to the deep, strange currents of the world. The hollows that seem to serve no function are the spaces where I hold other people's pain when they need someone to witness it. The asymmetry is not a mistake. It's evidence of growth, of change, of a life actually lived rather than perfectly curated. I still smile, of course I do. A smile is a gift, a social bond, a moment of shared humanity. Smiles are how we signal to each other that we're friendly, that we're safe, that we're part of the same tribe. But it is no longer my primary defense mechanism. It is no longer the wall I hide behind. I no longer use it to hide. I use it to communicate, and sometimes the most powerful communication happens when I choose not to smile. When I allow the complexity, the melancholy, the unexplainable wonder to sit visibly on my face, untranslated, unmediated, raw. I've learned that there's a difference between the smile that connects and the smile that conceals. The smile that connects comes from a place of genuine warmth, of actual feeling. The smile that conceals comes from fear, from the desperate need to be acceptable. I'm getting better at knowing the difference, at choosing consciously rather than reflexively. It is in those unguarded moments, when I let my face show what I'm actually feeling, when I let the sadness or confusion or overwhelm be visible, that we offer others the permission to do the same. We give them permission to stop explaining, to stop justifying, to stop performing. We give them permission to simply be, in all their beautiful, tragic, and inexplicable glory. I think about Mrs. Davison sometimes. I wonder if she remembers me, remembers that strange pot that wasn't a pot. I wonder if, in her long career of teaching children to make functional objects, she ever encountered other kids like me, kids whose hands refused to make what they were told to make. I wonder if she understood, on some level, what was happening in that moment, or if it was just another day, another student who didn't follow instructions. I hold no resentment toward her. She was working within a system that values standardization, that measures success by how well you can follow directions and produce predetermined outcomes. She was kind. She was trying to help me succeed within that system. The system itself is the problem, not the individual teachers caught in it. The system that tells us there's a right way to be human. The system that values productivity over presence, achievement over authenticity, the curated image over the messy reality. The system that has no room for the inside of important thoughts. But here's what I know now. The weight of the sky is heavy, but you are not meant to carry it alone. That's the secret they don't tell you. The culture of individualism would have you believe that your struggles are yours alone to solve, that asking for help is weakness, that if you just try hard enough, think positive enough, you can bootstrap your way to happiness. But that's a lie. We are social creatures. We are built for connection. We need each other not just in the good times, not just when we're putting our best foot forward, but especially in the dark times, when we're confused and scared and don't have the answers. When you stop hiding, when you risk showing someone the tangled, asymmetrical truth of your interior life, one of two things happens. Either they step back, uncomfortable, unable to meet you there, in which case you've learned something valuable about the limits of that relationship. Or they step forward, recognition lighting their eyes, and say, "Me too. I thought I was the only one." And in that moment, the unbearable weight of the sky gets distributed. You're still carrying it, but now there are two sets of shoulders, two sets of hands, and somehow that makes all the difference. I'm writing this now at 35, sitting in a coffee shop, watching people come and go, each carrying their own invisible burdens, each maintaining their own performances. I see the exhaustion behind the smiles. I see the way hands grip coffee cups a little too tight, the way eyes go distant mid-conversation. I see us all, trying so hard to be okay, to be normal, to fit into the narrow definitions of acceptable human experience. And I want to say, you don't have to keep hiding. You don't have to keep translating your vast, strange, beautiful interior life into bite-sized, acceptable pieces. You don't have to smile when you want to scream or cry, or just sit in stunned silence at the overwhelming mystery of being alive. You can lower the curtain. You can risk being seen. It's terrifying, yes. You might be misunderstood. You might be rejected, but you might also be met. You might also find your people. You might also discover that the thing you thought made you broken is actually the thing that makes you most fully human. The sculpture that wasn't a pot was never the problem. The problem was a world that only had room for pots. But the world is bigger than we've been told. There's room for the strange, the asymmetrical, the unexplainable. There's room for you, exactly as you are, with all your tangled tendrils and inexplicable depths. You just have to be brave enough to take up that space, to stop apologizing for the shape of your soul, to stop hiding what you can't explain and instead find the people who don't need you to explain, who understand through their own experience of the same profound, beautiful, terrifying weight. This is what I've learned. The smile is useful, but truth is essential. Connection is worth the risk, and you are not, have never been, and will never be alone in your strangeness. The weight of the sky is heavy, but together we can hold it.